Hi, everyone. Before we get to today's episode of Jung in the World, I just wanted to let you know that we have a few new programs on our website that includes in-person programs and online webinars and a new webinar series about images of individuation in the Red Book. Also, we've started our holiday sale, which means 30% off CE courses and downloads through the end of the year. For all of that, just visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thanks.
Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and I'm your host for Jung in the World. I'm delighted today to welcome Dr. Peter Demuth, a clinical forensic psychologist and Jungian psychoanalyst in private practice. He's an international lecturer as well as an instructor at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. He has published numerous papers on such topics as ego strength, psychopathy, and in December 2023, he released this book entitled Monsters in Life and Literature, and Peter's going to talk with us about that today. Welcome, Peter. It's great to have you on Jung in the World.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. After reading the book, I wanted to get you on to have this conversation about good, evil, and psychopathy. And I want to make an admission right at the top of this call in that because I follow the digital culture, as well as the embedded culture, I can't help but see just how psychologized the collective has become. And so words get tossed around that actually have clinical definitions, and they have become part of just the parlance of our times. And psychopathy, I think, is one of those words. And so part of the reason I wanted to have you on the show is to really kind of frame out the making of a psychopath, some of the things that you had to say about violence and what this sort of means to the society. So I'm going to kick off with asking you a question about the prison populations that you serve. So you're a forensic psychologist, and you worked for years in the prison system working with violent criminals. And I was curious if you could just talk about the making of a violent psychopath.
I'll do my best. Let me see if I can get started. First of all, I worked in the prison system, a maximum security prison, back in the early 90s. I was there. It was after I finished my internship for my doctorate. I went to work at the Patuxent Institution, and that's a maximum security prison. But it was really unique because there's only two places in the country at that time that were focused on treatment of people. Most prisons were like you go and you serve your time and you pay your debt to society. So we were focused on this idea of treatment. Now, psychopaths in the prison population, if you talk to people, they're not as prevalent as you think. In the prison population, there are probably about 15% of the prison population would be psychopathic. Most people have either a antisocial personality or some other kind of personality disorder, but not psychopath. And what makes a psychopath so unique and so dangerous is this idea of like lack of empathy and lack of remorse and lack of even like worrying about what their actions are how they're going to like impact people. And so this idea of like, in my book, the one person that was most like a psychopath to me was the monster Dracula, because Dracula needed your blood, didn't care about how he got it, didn't care about how he hurt you or destroyed you. And there's another component to the psychopath that's really quite interesting. It's this idea of like being inflated. They really think that they're smarter than you, and they get their jollies off of this idea of like being able to somehow outsmart you. In fact, so we like quote unquote normal people, we believe in this idea of trust. We believe in this idea of developing relationships. Well, a psychopath will use that against us. That's the problem when we're worth it. They will figure out ways what to say to us to make us feel like we should drop our barrier, why we should trust them, why we should be comfortable with them, and then they use it against us. And then after they do, they really are enthralled by the idea that they've made us look foolish.
So there's a lot to unpack there, right? Let's just take a second. So first of all, something I've observed about this idea of lack of empathy in the way the world seems to be tilting in this moment. And we're talking in summer of 2025. I don't have your wisdom or your training, but to me it seems as if it's more than a lack of empathy, that's actually too soft. That what we're witnessing is a deep capacity for cruelty. And I'm not sure those are the same thing, Peter. What would you say?
Well, first of all, the word cruelty, when I hear that word, it's like, I ask, why would someone want to be cruel? What is it about the idea of like being cruel? What does that serve? Again, in the book, when you look at Eric, people forget that the Phantom of the Opera's name was Eric. But Eric was this person born into a family. His father was the archetype of the Paris Opera House. But he was born ugly. So when you read Leroux's book, his mother at a very early age made him wear a mask because she was embarrassed by the fact that he was ugly. And so he did not feel like he was loved and nurtured. So what does he do? When he leaves the home, he goes to the Far East and he becomes a torturer in one of the Khan's courts.
Mm-hmm.
And he learns the art of torture because he himself has felt like he's been tortured. He himself has felt that people have treated him cruelly. And now in order, the cliche, misery likes miserable company.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, this is the way he develops his community, his way of relating to other human beings by hurting them and then not feeling alone, but a part of something, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I am following.
So cruelty is a really, that's why I got fascinated with the forensic psychology. It's like when I was in the prison, I kept asking, why do these people do these things? Why does someone jump out of a tree and rape a woman on a jogging path? Why does someone burn down their trailer when their wife is in there because they're Catholic and he can't get a divorce, so he has to find another way to end a relationship? All of these things are kind of like, they're not always straightforward, consciously cruel.
I see.
Sometimes it's an idea of the selfishness. Sometimes it's an impulsive way to get a result that you want. And then sometimes you suffer for that. Now, that's why, like, most of the people in prison are not psychopaths. They have the ability to be rehabilitated. However, the warden used to always remind me, he says, this idea of rehabilitation, he says, what happens if you've not been habilitated to begin with?
Yeah.
What happens if you come out of a family that you didn't learn how, like Eric, he didn't learn that he was loved and nurtured by his mother. And so he was always, what can I do to in fact, what he did is became a very observant individual of other people so he could then use and manipulate them through his understanding of them. So that's one of the things the psychopath does. He observes you. He says, what is this person? What is their need? I think in one of the, in our correspondence, you were talking about this, you were asking about this idea of if a psychopath is treated, would that in turn teach them how to become a better psychopath?
Yes.
And that's exactly right.
Right, because they have the language. They might have dark and what words that are on the table for this interview, Peter, are good and evil. They might have very Machiavellian ideas about where they want this relationship with the person that they're manipulating to go, but they've learned the phrasing, the psychological words. They can assume a persona of a person who is empathetic, but deep down it's just more window dressing.
Right. But it's window dressing, and it's a way to manipulate.
Yes.
There's a famous case, a guy named Charles Yuckel, and you can get the book about his case. It's called The Piano Teacher. There's this man, he would put advertisements in the Village Voice for piano lessons, and young women would come and he would give them a lesson, supposedly, and then he would murder them. So he gets caught and he gets sent to Rikers Island, and he's there. And what does he do? He's a model prisoner.
Ah,
And he delivers to the psychologist or whoever's treating him all of these things. And the guy says, wow, he's really turned it around. He's now like really like, and he gets released. And what do you think the first thing he does after he's released? He murders another woman.
yeah.
So they can really, they're good, very good actors. And they can tell you what, because they know what you want. Because when you're with them, you're feeling uneasy, and they're really, actually, I don't want to say they're being empathic toward you, but they're trying to make you feel comfortable by delivering to you what you want to hear. And then they'll say things like, "Doctor, you're one of the best people. You're the first person that really like listened to me and, really cares about me." And that really gets to you. But
Yeah.
it's like you have to understand what they're doing. And so that's why whenever you're working in a mental health situation or even in a prison, you do it as a teamwork. When you try to do it by yourself, or you take on too much responsibility for the decision-making process, you can get yourself in trouble because you can be manipulated.
Yes, and I can just imagine that dance, that dynamic of, the psychopath having great insight into another person is then becomes a weapon for them.
It is a weapon
Right.
because they wanna use that against you, and then they will feel an inner glee that they've manipulated you and they had power over you.
That's okay, let's go right there and next, because
All right, okay.
my sense of this, Peter, is that the psychopath, who is also malevolent, like deeply malevolent, is actually their ensnarement process gets very honed over years, meaning they get worse instead of better because they get more
They
practice.
they get worse for society, and they get better for their ability to manipulate. Right. So they become, that's why, like, what I say is, like, when you're really dealing with a psychopath or someone that's really dangerous, I always say we have to treat them humanely, but we should probably keep them locked up behind the wall,
Yeah,
period.
right.
And it's like when I first started in forensics, I wasn't quite a Jungian. If people ask me, "Who do you like?" I would say, "I don't know. I don't think I like Freud very much. I think I like that guy Jung because he talks about opposites."
Mm,
But when I first started working in the prison, I believed in the idea of the death penalty, and I believed the idea that when you do something like that, let's get rid of the guy.
mhm.
When I became a Jungian, I started to say, okay, no matter how bad a person is, there's some good, and they still deserve to be treated humanely. And so I started to switch my idea. And so even now, it's like I have this thing called the 99% rule, that even though 99% says they're probably, I'm going to at least allow myself to be somewhat open to what the larger truth might be. If that makes any sense.
It does
I want to,
yeah, it makes a great deal of sense, because I think in your position as a trained mental health professional, it's important to be able to believe that there's something good inside the other person, and that I'm guessing part of the task is to let the person who's the psychopath, or the person who has been a violent criminal, discover that for themselves, that there's something good inside. It's been covered up by a lot of other muck.
well, yeah, a
A-
good example.
Am I being too Pollyanna here?
No, 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 no. I think it's good to be Pollyannish within a structure.
Mm,
It's good to have hope, but I think you also need to be tethered to live the reality. But it's like, okay, one of the things that really affected the way I look at these things is like when I was reading Bram Stoker's Dracula. And people hear me say this all the time because I think it's so important. There's a scene where Lucy, who is like Minna's best friend, they have to destroy her. She's been turned into a vampire. They go to the grave and they put a stake through her heart, and they put her to rest. And then Minna says to Van Helsing and the rest of the group, she says, and this is what I think is so important: let us not forget that the person who needs our sympathy the most is the monster, because the monster is the one that's furthest removed from humanity. And we need to find a way somehow to bring them back into the fold to the extent possible. That's the goal. So not to get religious and all that, but I was brought up Catholic, and we had all these things about turning the other cheek and all that. But I finally realized, I think what Christ meant when he said to love your enemies, he didn't mean to put up with crap or let them hurt you. He says that when it's Minna says, here's what she says to Van Helsing. Let us not forget that he's the one that needs our sympathy the most, but let that not stay your hand in his destruction.
Mm.
But then she goes further and she says, but don't destroy him out of hate, destroy him out of love. You're doing it out of love to restore him to his human form instead of being way out there on the fringes of being disconnected, if that makes sense.
It makes a great deal of sense. It's profound, in fact. So, how often is psychopathy, this Machiavellian manipulation, how often are those behaviors, in your estimation, about control? It's about being in, so let's say, for instance, if going back to what you said about what the warden said to you, is that they have never been habilitated in the first place. In other words, there's some serious darkness in their own childhoods and pasts, and they grow into that almost. I guess I would say that's a non-clinical description, but how much of that is trying to gain control over what probably was a childhood of chaos?
Everything is about control. The ego wants to know that it's safe. That's the first job of the ego, to survive and to make sure that the lion's not going to eat it or someone's not going to kill it or hurt it. So that's the first thing, is control. How do you create an atmosphere where you feel less threatened, where you feel less scared? And I think sometimes, what's that old cliche that to do unto others before others do unto you? If you're in a situation where you feel that people are as dog eat dog, a world, then you're going to try to get the other guy before he gets you.
Right.
But control is the whole thing. Now, it's really wonderful when we have what I call a healthy ego, a healthy functioning ego, because then when we're already kind of like somewhat balanced, and we don't have to feel about, I've got to get an advantage over this person. We come into the room. It's like, for example, my wife might say, when you're going to talk to Patricia Martin today and you're a little nervous, say to yourself, I like what I'm going to say. She's going to like what I'm going to say, and together we're going to have a good time. So you come in with a sense of being a little bit more relaxed, instead of like, what do I got to do to get an advantage?
Yeah, you're not defended.
Well, I'm trying not.
So far, so good, Peter. So far, so good.
All right. So control, I think, it speaks to the heart of the matter. It's like when we go out on the street and we're driving, and the jerk cuts us off. All of a sudden, we feel someone's trying to get an advantage. Someone's trying to dictate to us. So what do? We get angry, and we give them the finger, or we chase after them and said, "What did you do?" But it's about trying to feel like we have the ability to like control our own lives. And some people have more ego strength to do that in a healthy way, but some people have to find ways to take advantage, to tread on other people, to put them under their thumb. It really has a lot to do with what you've experienced.
Well, that leads me to probe into how this strategy actually works, and how the strategy of being bold and being threatening, bullying, these kind of strong-armed approaches, you say in the book, actually for a long time work for the psychopath. And
They
then
do.
something unravels, or is there a moment where that all hits a wall?
Well, I think it hits a wall when society catches up to it. I'm not quite sure. Let's say the psychopath. Let's say you're arrested for multiple times of assault and battery. I don't know whether you ever, um, I think if you're in treatment, maybe you can learn. They have this called, what is it, restoration justice or whatever, where you sit with victims. And so I think that if you have if you're not a psychopath, you might have a capacity to start to feel empathy or start to feel like I did wrong and I need to make amends. But a lot of times it's not really that. You get arrested and you're put into prison, but then you get into fights and you establish dominance inside the prison walls too. It's like, can you defend yourself? Can you not be taken advantage of once you get in there? So I think that what really curbs it is you get arrested. Eventually, you've run afoul of the law. But it doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, some people can do something and they can learn their lesson and come back out to society and be good.
So I want to toggle over to this other meme, I guess I'll call it. I think it's bigger than a meme.
Okay.
Is the way the digital sphere is on fire with content about narcissism. And, I remember reading something the psychoanalyst Jessica Benjamin wrote about something that she saw as being a big shift in the culture. And let me quote her. She talks about that Narcissus has replaced Oedipus as the myth of our time. And in another quote, Narcissus overthrew Oedipus in the consulting room. As a Jungian, what do you say about that?
Well, I've never really, to tell you the truth, I've never really been keen on the Oedipus myth. I'm sure it exists and all that. And I remember when I was 5 years old, I had a dream where I was looking down through the cracks in the floor, and this big gorilla was looking up at me. And I always thought that was probably an edible dream to say, "Stay away from mom." But narcissism, let's just focus on what is narcissism. And we have a person, a commander in chief right now, who probably is such an embodiment of what it means to be a narcissist. A narcissist is someone who is so fragile and so afraid that they're not worth anything that they have to create a world that says, I'm the best. I am I know more than anyone. And it has to be absolute. And what they will do is they will do everything they can to stay away from the other side of that, which is shame.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think again, this idea of being human, this idea of being able to negotiate, to be in the world, to develop relationships, to have friends, to be reliable. When when you have a short supply of healthy ego strength, I think what happens is that you look for ways to like you were using the word persona. A persona is something is like we put on the mask to play a role. And sometimes if the role gives us a sense of like we pulled that off or we were good at that, then we want to wear that mask because that protects us. Um, Cowshed talks a lot about this, and I'm really into his work. But there were people that talked about what Cowshed talks about before Cowshed. But this idea of like when you've been hurt, you will the self will protect itself. The self will say, "I'm only going to go so far, and I'm going to like make sure that I don't." It's like I'm not going to trust that person because I know that they could hurt me. So in other words, I'm going to stay in a safe, it's kind of like, what do you call it? Broadband.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, if I open up too much, then this persecutor comes in my psyche. It says, I'm going to get you. And then you pull back.
Mm-hmm.
And then like we were talking about earlier about therapy, the therapist, you start to develop this relationship and you start to trust, but then the not the protect, yeah, the protector wants to say, should I trust this person? But then the persecutor says, don't trust. And so what it is you stay stuck. But back to narcissism, Narcissism, I think there's a lot more of it in society now because we have a we have so much. I don't want to blame it on diversity, but we have so many people claiming this is what's right, or and pointing fingers, and the cancel culture, and it's so dangerous. It's like even now, like even at the institute, we were talking about um, instituting a DEI proposal, but people were afraid that since we're a nonprofit, the government could come after us,
Right.
and so this narcissism is this idea of like how do you bolster yourself? How do you um, feel good about yourself? But in a persona kind of way. It's like the best guard against narcissism, I think, is just a healthy ego, to be open, to kind of like um, what is it? Admit your, we could talk a whole hour or so about shadow, and how in order to do, I have this one patient right now who's trying to do some deeper work with the psyche, but he wasn't prepared, and he got really frightened by the archetypal energy because he hasn't done his shadow work yet. And until you integrate your own shadow, you can't do the deeper work because you're really, really, really vulnerable. So I think narcissism basically is a good defense when you're scared or when you're not sure. All of a sudden you say, "Oh, I know what I'm talking about. That person is the idiot." It's like, again, like wanting to somehow degrade the other side by beefing yourself up. It's a really, really good defense, you know? Um,
It seems to me that that's also a defense, though, that it it runs its course, as it were. And what's also interesting, I think, is that because this has become such an issue, as I look at it, in the 1980s, you had Christopher Lasch identifying that we had entered an age of narcissism, that it was, a worldwide mindset, and most especially acute in America. And, because we have a propensity to consume a lot of media, we cook up a lot of that world culture here and ship it out. And so now it appears, this is how I see it, we're entering into the late stages of that moment in the collective where we're saturated in it now.
so when you say we're entering into the later stages of it, I think what you're hinting at is that things continue to change. We go through ups and downs. We go through times when um, narcissism maybe is heightened, and then sometimes where it's not. But that's what I say about what's going on right now in the country. People are like fretting, they're pulling their hair out, and I say, yeah, it is difficult. We are going through a difficult time, but this is the way the world works. If there is an ebb and flow, there is an up and down,
Sure.
and remember, I tell people also, evil and goodness are equal. There's not like this idea we're gonna get to a good world and we're gonna eradicate evil. It doesn't work that way. Evil, that's the tension of the opposites.
Right.
Evil will always be there. It's an individual thing that become conscious of it, and we make choices to act in a certain way. But we can be vulnerable to either one because they both exist and they both want your attention.
I think I think the thing that I've noticed about why I suspect we are entering the late stages of the culture of narcissism is that with the internet, now people speak out about what their mysterious, you know, wolf in sheep's clothing experience was with this sort of pathological ensnarement, you know, where somebody, enters into a relationship really purely to control or for malevolent aims. And now there's all this information about what the red flags are, who these people are. So, knowledge is power. Whether that knowledge is 100% accurate or clinical in its, crispness, the truth of the matter is a lot more people are onto the game.
Well, I think it's that in and of itself is good. It's good to know what what are the things behind the mask or what's going on in the smoke-filled rooms. Because it's easy to be naive. I mean, I've been naive all my life, I think. I grew up that way. In a family, it's like good. The nuns taught us to be good, and that most people are good. And so when you can understand the indicators when people aren't so good, it's good to know that, because
Yes.
then you can kind of be more aware. It's like the idea when you're treating a psychopath or treating a narcissist, it's good to know that you could be manipulated and to be aware of that. But if you're not aware of that, then you're very vulnerable.
Right. Right. So essentially what you're saying is knowledge is power when it comes to this. Not that you're seeking power, but certainly you want to avoid having intimate relationships with psychopaths.
Well, I go back to this idea of good and evil. I think I like a quote by the Buddha. The Buddha says that it's not a matter of good and evil, it's a matter of ignorance versus wisdom.
Ah,
If that makes any sense, because yeah, we want to, like, when we make a decision or when we interact with someone, we want to do it as authentically as possible. But that takes a certain amount of, like, growth and a certain amount of, like, work, because it's so much easier, the idea of blaming the other guy, not taking responsibility, you know? Or the shadow again. It's like I am so taken aback by my own shadow sometimes. I'll be driving along the road and I'll be on the highway and this guy will be coming in the entrance ramp, and instead of pulling in, he goes all the way up the entrance ramp and sneaks in up there, and I'm but then yes, the next day I'm doing the same thing.
right. And I think Jung spoke to this.
Yeah.
He was commenting on this issue of good and evil, and there's a quote, and I think you quoted it in the book that quote, a shirking of ethical responsibility deprives a person of wholeness and imposes a painful fragmentariness on his life.
Right.
How does that show up in a consulting room when you have somebody in front of you as an analysand? Does that reveal itself to you, that fragmentariness?
Yes, I think it does. I think, first of all, in the consulting room, you're gonna see the personas. You're gonna see, somehow the way people construct their life. You're gonna see the denial of shadow, and all of this stuff, um, contributes to a lack of wholeness. Because if I mean, I like to talk about the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, and he's sitting there in Sarnath, India, and he's enlightened, and the enlightenment says, "You know, if I go over there and I become anger, then all of a sudden my whole world is clouded by anger, and I'm not available to anything else in the whole universe.
Mm,
But if I allow myself to feel anger, but not to become anger, then I have an ability to be human, but also to be available to the rest." So people come into the consulting room and they're habituated to certain ways of behaving. And so by behaving in certain ways, they cut themselves off from other parts of the whole, such as when I just told that example about the shadow, the guy coming on the ramp. So what you do when that presents itself, you start to say, okay, well, what about that? Have you seen that before? Does that look familiar? Or so it'll show up in a dream, and so all of a sudden you're trying to focus in something. They say, I do that.
right. So I think you're making a case for consciousness.
Well, consciousness is where it's at. Nothing happens unless you're conscious.
Yeah.
That's why the ego is so important. But consciousness is where it's at, and consciousness occurs under the Bodhi tree. It doesn't occur when we're angry. It doesn't occur when we're in love so much. It occurs when we're sitting there and we're being conscious.
Yes.
And that's one of the hardest things to do. In fact, sometimes I upset people. I say, nature never meant for us to be conscious, because we're creatures of habit. We want to act out of habit. We don't want to have to think through and have free will. It's too difficult.
Oh, yes, and especially in our times. There's so much. I mean, it's a lot to take in. It's almost
Well,
an
e-
inhuman task,
every time has its challenges, though. Remember the quote from Frodo when he's getting ready to go off on the journey, And he says to Gandalf, he says, "I wish that this had not come to me." And Gandalf says, "So does everyone that's ever been in a situation like this. Wishes it hadn't come to him." But it's not for us to argue about that. It's us to decide what we're going to do
with the time we are given us. Yes. It's a great line. It's a great line. And it's also, it echoes what Joseph Campbell said. The hero never believes he's prepared. Right? And so what you're talking about is this consciousness that also helps you be aware of your capability, what's good inside, what's right. It's not just a matter of being conscious of your dark side, right?
Let me piggyback on what you just said a minute ago. When Joseph Campbell says the hero never believes they're prepared or fully prepared,
right?
That's
they always doubt right before they embark.
But that's humility. The narcissist, on the other hand, would say, "I know everything. I am prepared," and they don't know everything, and they're not prepared.
Because who could be?
Right.
And so life is part of what defines courage is being able to live into the mystery.
And also to allow, like Dennis Merritt would say to me one time when I was in supervision, he says, "Demuth, quit thinking you can solve everything. Make room for the self." And so I think that's exactly right. We have to make room for the self or the divine intervention or the talisman, because we can't say I can do it all on my own.
That's a beautiful note to land on. I want to thank you so much, Peter Demuth, for being on the show. We're going to link to your book, Monsters in Life and Literature. A forensic psychologist reflects on the nature of good and evil, so people can find you online. And you have been such a treasure and so well admired at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. I just want to thank you personally, Peter, for taking time to be on the show and for all you do at the Institute. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about training programs, live and self-study courses, archives, this podcast, our blog, or to find Jungian analysts near you, visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2024 donors who gave at the contributor level or above. Barbara Anand, PhD in honor of Fred Maples, S.J., Uni Alcott, Judith and Eric Cooper, David Dalrymple, Mary Doherty, Full Bloom Lotus Center for Self-Awareness, Boris Matthews, Bruce G. and Mary A. Robert Family Foundation, Diane Sherwood, Lawrence C. Tingley, Alexander Wayne and Lynn Kopp, and the Blackbaud Giving Fund. You can support this podcast by making a donation at our website, jungchicago.org.